off of that 0, okay, off of that x-axis. So odd will cross, even will bounce, okay, odd cross, even bounce. So our directions here say sketch the polynomial function, then determine the function's domain, range, and end behavior, and use interval notation. So we've been using that a lot. Okay, we also went over inequality for a little bit, but intervals typically what we want to start to get towards. So we'll notice, right, this is in factored form. So if I want to sketch this, first, right, what are my factors? So in this case, we have negative x, and we have x minus 1, and we have x plus 2 squared. Okay, so we got 3, if you want to consider this as 2 factors, you could. Okay, but we're going to leave that as squared for now. And so what would the corresponding solutions be? Right, remember this is what would make each one equal 0. Well, the first one would equal 0 if x was just a 0, right? Negative 0 is just 0. The second one would be if x was a positive 1, because 1 minus 1 equals 0. And the last one would be negative 2. And so we're going to put these on our graph as 0, 0, 1, 0, and negative 2, 0. Right, those are going to be my x-intercepts, my zeros. But I also want to make note of what type of kind of intersection it's going to be. Is it going to be a cross or a bounce? So how that looks is, again, if the factor, so I got to go back up to this factor line, and is it odd or even, right? What exponent does it have? And in this case, since it has an exponent of 1, we would consider this odd, which means it's going to cross. In the next one, right, we can think of this whole thing as being to the first power, right? Or if we look back up here at the equation, we'll notice that there is no exponent here, so it does have to be a 1. Okay, so that will also be an odd, which means it will cross. And in the last one, we'll notice this now has an exponent of 2, which means it's even and will bounce. Okay, so I'll show you what that means in terms of cross or bounce in just a second. But that's how we find it. We look up here in the factors area, right, each individual factor, and we look at the exponents. Are those odd or even? Odds will cross, odd, cross, evens will bounce. Okay, so how this looks on our graph. Well, the other thing before we do that is we want to recognize this entire function, right? Is it odd or even? And is my function positive or negative? So if we think back to the very beginning, right, we got to count my variables, and this we got to think of as x plus 2 times x plus 2, right? There are 2 of them. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So a total of 4, which means this would be an even function. And positive negative comes from our leading coefficient, which is a negative 1. Okay, so it's even because the degree was 4. It's negative because a was negative 1. So what does that look like on the graph? So again, this isn't a very specific graph, right? We're not building a table here, but we can get a general idea of what it's going to look like. So first, we want to plot our x-intercepts, right? Our solutions here. So we have 0, 0. We have 1, 0. And we have negative 2, 0. So if we think back to the odd, even, positive, negative nature, the ends of my graph, since A is negative, right, will go down on the right, and since it's even, the left one will be the same. So I know my ends should kind of do that, right? And again, it could do whatever in the middle, but the ends have to be able to do that. So if I look at my graph, I'm going to say my right end, so from this right point, right, as far to the right as we can go, so this point needs to go to the down direction, right? My right arrow needs to go down, and my left arrow also needs to go down, so that's going to come from this one. Okay, so that kind of gives us an idea of what the ends will look like, and now I have to figure out what happens in the middle. So that's where our odd, crossing, and even bouncing comes into play. So at 0, 0, it says I need to cross. So at 0, 0, I need to cross. And actually, let's go back to, let's go find this one first. We'll go left to right. So at -2, it says it should be bouncing. So at -2, it needs to bounce off of that line. So I'm actually going to redraw this arrow a little bit so that when it comes up, it's going to bounce off of that point. Okay, so we'll see right here at -2, it doesn't actually cross through, right? Crossing it would be going to the other side. It just kind of hits it and bounces off and comes back, right? Like a ball throwing it off the wall. It's going to hit the wall and come back. U-turn. So that point bounced. My next point, whoops, wrong button. My next point is 0, 0. So if we find 0, 0, that one needs to cross. So my graph, even though it bounced, needs to be able to come back to 0, 0, and it needs to cross. So it doesn't really matter where this line turns around. I'm just going to have it turn around down here at 3, and then it needs to cross through my graph. So you'll notice it goes all the way through that point. And lastly, right, it kind of looks, it's almost done, right? It looks like it should, right, at some point kind of turn around to come back down. And we'll notice that at 1, positive 1, it does. It needs to cross, right? It says cross. So I need to go from one side to the other side. So this part needs to come back and cross, right? And so you can see right there at 1, it goes from the top half to the bottom half. And then we finish out our graph. Okay, so again, it's not super specific, right? These little, kind of low points and high points may not be in the exact right spot that they're supposed to be, but it said to sketch it. And so this just kind of gives us a general idea of what that graph is going to look like. Okay, so crossing, right? If I'm at a point and I'm crossing through, versus bouncing is more like a U-turn, right? Bounce off. Okay, so crossing versus bouncing. So that's number 5. And that's it. That's all you got to do. You don't have to build a table or anything like that. So number 6. Again, the first thing we want to do is recognize it is in factored form. So my factors in this case are x minus 2 and x plus 1 and x plus 3. And we'll notice all of them have an exponent of 1, right? There's no kind of squared we have to deal with, which is good. So we'll just keep that in mind. Our solutions then for each one, x would need to be a positive 2, x would need to be a negative 1, and x would need to be a negative 3. So from there, we know that we have the points 2, 0, negative 1, 0, and negative 3, 0. And as we look at what type of factor it is, right, using that exponent, we saw that all the exponents were 1, right, which is odd. So in this case, all of them are odd, and so they will cross. If we try to figure out odd even versus positive, or sorry, odd even and then positive negative, if we count our variables, 1, 2, 3, this would be an odd function, specifically degree 3. And our leading coefficient, there's no number there, right, which means it must be a 1. So we have a positive function because a is just positive 1. Okay, so since a is positive, my right arrow needs to go up. Since my degree is odd, the arrows need to go opposite directions, so my left arrow must go down. So as we graph this, we have our intercepts, so 2, 0, negative 1, 0, and negative 3, 0. We know that the right side needs to go up, left side needs to go down. And in this case, if we start with our left one, so in this case, negative 3, it's odd and crossing, so it needs to go from one side to the other side, so it does need to cross through. So I'm just going to cross. But I do see, right, it's got to come back down to this one. So we're going to cross, come back up, and come down. And what's got to happen at negative 1? Well, negative 1 is another cross. So we're just going to keep on crossing through. Again, go down. And we got to come back up. And does that one need to cross? Like we kind of drew it, right? And it looks like it should cross. And yes, at 2, it does need to cross. So in this case, that would be our graph. And again, is it perfect? No. But is it a good sketch? Give you an idea of what it looks like? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I'm going to give you a moment to try number 7. Okay, so at this point, if you want to try this on your own, go ahead and pause the video for however long you need to. And I'm going to wait about 5 seconds, and then I'm just going to kind of quietly go through, or quickly go through the process for 7. Okay, so try it on your own if you can, if you think you kind of get the hang of what it is, and then check it. Okay, see how you guys did.